Alright, today we're going to do a little bit different of a video. Not in that we've never done deck techs here before. We've talked about Delver without having actual gameplay in the same video, but we've never been on MTGO before. We're no longer on Xmage. We are now on the official Magic Online client, which is extremely exciting. I'm looking forward to fewer client issues. People complain about MTGO on the internet all the time, on Reddit, on Twitter. You constantly hear about bugs, problems like that. I doubt those people play on Xmage very much. We've had a lot of problems on Xmage, be it disconnecting, opponents sometimes just leaving, opponents leaving immediately. One time I had someone join the game, mulligan into oblivion, quit, and then join in the next one and be perfectly fine because their hand didn't suck. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the fact that you have to pay to be on MTGO, filtering out some of the players who we don't want to play against. And the other fact being, since we're on MTGO and we're paying, the client is significantly better than Xmage. I agree, MTGO does have some problems, and I love Xmage to death. But having played on both, and I've been playing on MTGO probably for around a month or two now, just trying to get the feel for it with a budget deck before I actually bought into the rest of this gloriousness, I quite like the client. I like it a lot. Anyways, let's talk about the deck. We are now playing Rug Temur Delver in Modern on MTGO. A few things about this. The deck is almost complete. I actually got one more bauble than we were playing on Xmage because I think I want the third. I don't have Scalding Tarns on here. Tarn's expensive. Playing other fetch lands certainly is going to cause us to lose percentage points. Are those percentage points worth roughly 100 USD? I'm not sure. If I was 100% competitive, we need to win, I would say absolutely they definitely are. And I do plan on getting Scalding Tarns for the deck. But I'm not going to use them right away because Magic's expensive and Tarns, it's just another $100. We could use Flooded Strand and Wooded Foothills instead. It's not ideal. Sometimes you run into problems with Flooded Strand where the only green source you can get is Breeding Pool, and that's a legitimate issue. Not being able to fetch out Stomping Ground definitely comes up. The other thing is that we have fewer blue fetches and fewer red fetches than we normally would be running. We'd have 8 between the Misties and the Tarns for blue, which is great for getting islands for Blood Moon, and we would have 6 red fetches to fetch out a basic mountain, which is nice against aggro decks when you don't want to take so much damage to your life total. You don't always want to shock. Those are some of the main places we're going to be losing our percentage points. Hopefully we're okay with that. We're going to find out probably as we play. Like I said, I brought in a third bauble. I cut the second Disrupting Shoal for that, or actually no, I cut the mountain to the sideboard for that. The second Disrupting Shoal left for a second Spell Snare. I like Spell Snare a lot right now. I like Spell Snare a lot in general. I found that the Spell Snare in my sideboard came in basically every matchup. Not all of them, but I made a sideboard guide for myself just to see how often I was bringing which cards in and in what matchups I actually wanted to board what in and out. And I found that Spell Snare is something I want pretty much all the time. So I think it should be in the main board. The only matchup I really don't want it, as far as popular decks go, is Eldrazi because they don't have many 2s. They do have 1s that you want to get with Shoal in Expedition map. To be fair, Spell Snare can snag a Chalice on 1, but I don't think that's a reason to keep Spell Snare in the deck. I don't think that's enough reason to actively want to Spell Snare against them. In general, I really like Spell Snare, and I think I'm okay with cutting the Disrupting Shoal. So this is the 60 we're going to be using for now. This is definitely subject to change, as the deck always has been. Over to the sideboard, there are a few changes. Most notably, there is now a basic mountain here, no longer in the main board. Now we're only running 17 lands. Hopefully that's enough for Savage Knuckleblade. That's my biggest concern going down to 17 lands right now. I haven't run Knuckleblade with 17 lands before. Hopefully between 3 baubles, 2 traverse, and our other cantrips, that's perfectly fine. Mountains in the board. Like I said, it's great against aggro decks. It's also something I want against decks with Path to Exile, just so we have the 4th basic. If I did have the Scalding Tarns, I would pretty often, maybe not often, there is a thing you can do with basic mountain out of the board where you bring it in and you take out Breeding Pool against decks where you really want to slam a Blood Moon, because Breeding Pool is bad when you want to slam Blood Moon on 3. You either cut yourself off of a basic, unless you have that basic in your hand, but that's not that frequent, or you're not going to be able to play Blood Moon on 3 if you have this Breeding Pool on the battlefield. It becomes a mountain with Blood Moon on board, but it's not a mountain when you're casting it. So, Breeding Pool is pretty bad when you're on the straight-up gotta Blood Moon them plan. Mountain is significantly better since it's going to be a mountain anyways. You may as well not have to pay shock for it. It's pretty nice. It's a nice thing to do. To be fair, they changed the rules on how Blood Moon works. Magus of the Moon as well now. I believe that was with Iconic Masters coming out. Or was it with Ixalan? I don't remember. They probably made the rules update happen ahead of time anyways. With a Blood Moon effect on the board, as enter the battlefield effects no longer happen if the land becomes a mountain. So with shocks, normally as they enter the battlefield you pay 2 life. It's not a basic mountain yet as it enters the battlefield. So the ability happens, you either pay 2 life or it's tapped. With the new Blood Moon rule, it's a mountain as it enters the battlefield as well effectively. So that ability's gone and you won't pay shock. Still, I think there is a non-zero benefit to having Mountain instead of a Shock when you're using that mana to cast Blood Moon. Since it's going to be red anyways, you may as well not have to have paid the 2 life. It's definitely relevant in a non-zero amount of cases. We can't really do the Mountain Breeding Pool swap because we don't have Scalding Tarn. Normally, I'd be totally okay with it. Flooded Strand is the issue here. If we take Breeding Pool out of this list, put it into the sideboard, I'm not talking in deck building, just during matches. If you board out Breeding Pool, Flooded Strand cannot get a green source. That's bad. That's really, really bad. Flooded Strand can only find islands and plains. The only island we have, or plains, we don't run any plains, the only island we have that is also a green source is Breeding Pool. If we take Breeding Pool out of the 60, Flooded Strand can't get a green source. If you have Island Flooded Strand in your hand, or Flooded Strand Steam Vents, that's not that uncommon given that we have 2 Steam Vents, 2 islands, you don't have a green source and you're stuck trying to top deck it. That's not a great spot to be. I don't know how often that'll actually come up, but I think the risk there is high enough that I don't want to be siding out Breeding Pool. Even though, if I did have the Tarns, I would absolutely be okay with that. Obzon is one of the matchups where I think you gain a pretty good amount of, let's say, percentage points for making that switch, just because Mountain can be found off of Path to Exile, and Breeding Pool isn't really that relevant against them. We want a Blood Moon anyways, so I'm pretty happy with cutting it there. Not with this list. If these Flooded Strands were Scalding Tarns, that'd be fantastic. As is, they're not. And if I was to put in 1 or 2 Scalding Tarns, I think we're cutting at least 1 Wooded Foothills first, just so we have blue sources, blue fetches to get our islands for Blood Moon. Blood Moon is basically where most of the Scalding Tarn problems arise. Anyways, that's just talking about the Mountain. We went on for a while there. These cards were already here. Obviously, we're playing 3 Blood Moon. I love it. 2 Pyroclasm. Here we go. Flash Freeze. I like Flash Freeze. I like Flash Freeze. I like it a good bit in this meta. It's good against Burn and Titan Shift, Titan Shift is a matchup I want more cards for because I feel like it could be better. Rugscape Shift I like quite a bit because you can drop a Blood Moon, cut them off totally, and we just clock them. That's what we do. Our deck is basically designed to fight against Rugscape Shift. Probably not intentionally, but I do believe Rugscape Shift was at least somewhat popular early modern times. So that's something I like about Flash Freeze. It counters any red or green spell. It's basically an upgraded mana leak against the likes of Siege Rhino, Tarmogoyf, those guys. Those are good enough that I like having one of these in the board. Entrancing Melody is a card I am testing out. When I thought it was an instant, back when the card was leaked with the rare sheet, I was extremely excited for this. I was thinking of mainboarding one, just because it would even be good against manlands. As a sorcery, the card is significantly worse. I don't know if it's even going to be good. I think it's likely enough to be good that I definitely want to try it. I'm excited to steal Goyfs, Shadows, and even Knights of the Reliquary. That's basically all I have to say about that. It's a 2-for-1. It helps deal with fatties. I like it. Or at least, I like what it might end up doing. I don't know if it's going to be any good. The card could be awful. We're going to find out. Third card, last card that I brought in here, Bedlam Reveler. Right now, or not even right now, for the last while, Death's Shadow has basically supplanted the mid-range decks Modern has been known for. Jond, Obzon, they're much lower on the meta share than they used to be. Bedlam Reveler is great against those decks. It's a 4-for-1 when you top deck it. It's usually a 2 or 3-for-1 or better. It's a decent body and it draws you plenty of cards. Those are things we like against mid-range and control decks. The thing about Bedlam Reveler is, normally, back when we started playing this card in Rug Delver, people would sideboard in a bunch of Traverse the Ulvenwald because you could tutor out Bedlam Reveler. And that'd be great. Now, there aren't nearly as many mid-range and control decks in the format. So you can't really justify having 4 Traverse, 2 Reveler in your sideboard. That's a huge waste of space. You should not do that. Please don't do that. That's a bad idea. However, I like Traverse enough to run 2 in the main deck anyways. So this one Bedlam Reveler is essentially 3 copies of the card. And I'm pretty sure that having 3 copies of Reveler for 1 sideboard slot is a pretty good return against mid-range and control decks, given that Reveler is really good against them. Drawing a single Bedlam Reveler and resolving it against blue-white control or Obzon, which are basically the matchups for which this is in the board. It's good against pretty much any mid-range and control deck, but those are the popular ones, so those are the ones I thought of when I put it here. This card can swing games pretty hard. So running 1 copy of it, okay, you're basically going for sideboard roulette there, hoping to draw it. Having effectively 3 copies, that makes me pretty happy. I think having this Bedlam Reveler in the board, giving up 1 slot to have essentially 3 copies in my deck post-board, I think that gives enough of a return in the post-board matchups, post-board games against blue-white and Obzon that it's worth the slot. One thing I want to touch on before we're done here, well actually no, there are 2 things we're going to touch on. This video is actually going to be a lot longer than I anticipated. I thought it'd be like 5 minutes to talk about it, but as we know, I tend to not shut up. So anyways, first thing I want to touch on is Engineered Explosives is not in my 75. I like Engineered Explosives. I definitely believe it is an amazing card. It's very strong. I don't think it's nearly as good in the meta as it used to be. Back in the days of, I say this a lot, but when we ran Bedlam Reveler and we brought in EE to deal with Goyfs so that we could just win the card advantage game, EE was huge. EE took out their clock, and then we just ran away with the game, drawing a bunch of cards. It was fantastic. That was a viable strategy. With Death's Shadow in the metagame, that strategy is no longer nearly as important. I am playing Bedlam Reveler, as we can very clearly see, and I just spent some time talking about, so it's not like I don't want to grind out mid-range decks, but the mid-range decks just really aren't there. Grixis Death Shadow is certainly a mid-range deck, and I do plan on bringing Bedlam Reveler in against it, if for nothing else than to see how Bedlam Reveler does against it, because I don't like Reveler against Jund Shadow. So I haven't had it in my sideboard since Jund Shadow became a big thing, which is what originally got rid of the mid-range decks. However, Grixis plays a very different game plan than the Jund deck did. It relies a lot more on card advantage, I think, than just having 12 copies of undercosted fatties, 4 Goyfs, 4 Shadows, 4 Traverse. Getting a fatty, maybe getting 2 undercosted fatties, they're huge, beatdowns, good game. That was a more aggressive mid-range deck, whereas I think Grixis is a much more controlling mid-range deck, which I think Bedlam Reveler has a chance against. I want to see how it does. This is sort of another Entrancing Melody thing, whereas I know Bedlam Reveler is actually a pretty good card when you want it. I want to see if we actually want it. So yeah, back to EE. I go on tangents. I apologize if you guys don't know or don't appreciate all the tangents I tend to go on. EE, I don't like in the metagame. I used to justify it by matchups like Eldrazi-tron, where you can use it to blow up a lot of things. It can take out a Walking Ballista, an Expedition map, a Chalice of the Void. We have a lot of answers to Chalice of the Void. I don't think losing one is going to be a huge deal. Trying to blow up Expedition map with Engineer Explosives seems like an awful idea, and I'm not sure why I ever liked it in the first place. Expedition map is another card we have many answers to, and more so than Chalice, it usually sticks around for one turn and then gets sacked, and they can sack it in response to us using EE to blow it up. So I don't think you're going to have a lot of spots where EE is good against map. Other matchups where I liked EE include Obzon. Obzon, I actually like it quite a bit because the combination of Lingering Souls and Undercosted Fatties. You can EE for 2, blow up some Goyfs. You can EE for 0, blow up the Lingering Souls. Another thing about EE versus Pyroclasm against Lingering Souls, Delvers survive EE on 0. Shadows over Innistrad changed the DFC rule, where the back side of cards have the CMC of the front side. Insectile Aberration has a converted mana cost of 1. It survives EE for 0. You can blow up a host of spirit tokens and continue getting in with your Delvers. That's pretty good. So I do think EE is pretty good against Obzon. I don't like it against Eldrazi-tron anymore. I think it's kind of bad. I have been bringing one EE against Grixis Shadow, which I think is okay because I like having an answer to Shadow. Even if it's going to cost me 3 mana, you can blow up multiple Shadows, which is nice. On the downside, they can Kolaghan's Command it, which is a little unfortunate. Entrancing Melody basically took EE's spot in the sideboard here. It's very similar against Shadows, where it costs 3 mana to deal with them, and it's basically going to be a 2-for-1 all the time, whereas EE was sometimes a 1-for-1, sometimes a 2-for-1, sometimes even better. It is relevant that our life total doesn't go down as quickly as the Shadow players when we're going to be trying to steal their Shadows, but they do a pretty good job of lowering our life total in addition to their own. So I think we're going to be able to take Shadows often enough, as opposed to just taking them, making them smaller than 1/1, given that our life total is 13 or higher, and then having the Shadow just die. I think Melody's going to be better than that. Once again, I don't know. We're going to find out. So that's EE. I don't think I like EE anymore in the meta. I definitely think it's an amazing card. I don't want to run it right now. That's basically my story. Other thing I want to touch on, which is definitely more channel update than it is Rug Delver, even though we basically went channel update, we're playing MTGO, deck update, this is the deck, and now we're going back to the channel update. I plan on doing a competitive Modern League probably once every 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how it goes and how busy I am. I think that's going to be a pretty good schedule. Normally I've been playing 2 to 5 matches of Xmage. recorded per week. So we're basically going to be in the same range as that. We're going to have basically 2 to 5 matches of MTGO every week, because I'll either do 5 a week, or if I'm doing a league every 2 weeks, it'll basically be 2.5 a week on average. I think that's pretty good. One last thing I want to touch on is I am fully aware that this deck is not as good as the deck I've been playing on Xmage, just because it doesn't run Scalding Tarns, so we're going to lose percentage points. We're going to lose matches that we shouldn't be losing because I'm not spending the $100 on the Tarns yet. I still think the channel's going to be better than it was on Xmage. Xmage, like I said, we had a good share of problems. We disconnected a lot. MTGO, I don't think I've been disconnected on my desktop yet, which is what I use to record. So I'm pretty sure we can just have very smooth videos where we don't end up breaking up gameplay with, oh geez, I hope Xmage isn't going to lag us out of this. I really want to finish this match. And we'll actually get to finish our matches, and they'll go less interrupted. And it's going to be easier on me because I won't have those problems where people quit or I get disconnected and you guys don't end up seeing those videos because they suck, so I just scrap them and then record more, which means I'll have more time for recording good videos as opposed to recording crappy videos that I end up deleting. So then it's more likely that we're going to have more and better content. So I think overall going to MTGO is going to be a net good change for us. It's going to be positive, I think. Naturally, we'll find out. I think we're better off not having Tarns than we are playing on Xmage. And one last thing, I don't know how well I'm going to do in the competitive leagues. I've never played a competitive league before. The only play I've done on MTGO in the last couple months has been the open constructed room in tournament practice, just to get a feel for the user interface on here. So for all I know, we are going to 0-5 a bunch of times. Hopefully we're going to have fun doing it, and hopefully we're going to learn some stuff though. And you know what? If we become better Magic players, better Delver players, and learn some stuff and have some fun from watching me lose a bunch of matches on here because we're playing against a much more focused metagame where Xmage is really open, I have a feeling MTGO is going to be a lot more the top tiers, which is another reason I went over my sideboard a bit, came up with some sideboard plans, because I'm not really expecting to face nearly as many low-tier decks. I think we're going to be going up against a real gauntlet here of the higher tiers, and I want to have better plans for them as opposed to keeping EE in my sideboard because it's really good against Merfolk, and we need those Merfolk percentage points, even though we're going to play against it who knows how often. Probably a lot less than we used to on Xmage. That's almost a certainty. So hopefully this is a good thing for us. I am very excited to see how this is going to go. And yeah, I have no idea if we're going to do well in the comp leagues, but I am excited to get in there, go through the ringer, and be a better Magic player on the other side. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you're half as excited as I am. And I hope to see you in the first league. Let's do it.